The champagne flute is already at his lips when she moves, a blur of ivory silk cutting across the aisle, and crack, her palm connects with his jaw hard enough to send the glass shattering against the marble. 200 guests gasp as one. Security lunges. The groom, Min Jae-cho, heir to one of Seoul's most feared crime families, staggers back, more stunned by the slap than by the champagne now pooling red gold at his feet. No one sees what she saw. The faint shimmer dissolving in the wine, gone the second it hit stone. She's Dr. Hannah Reyes, ER physician, moonlighting as the wedding's on-call medic because she needed the extra shift pay, not because she wanted a front-row seat to a mafia wedding. She clocked the tremor in the bride's hand 2 toasts ago, the way Seo-yeon's smile never touched her eyes when she poured that particular glass. Now the entire estate thinks she just assaulted a syndicate boss in front of his own family. And the only person who might believe her is bleeding out beside her 15 minutes later, when the wedding convoy is run off a cliffside road and Hannah finds herself dragging Min-jae from a smoking wreck, sirens and camera flashes closing in from both directions, with no idea which one will reach them first. Jun-woo Kang woke to the sound of a heart monitor keeping time with a body that, by every reasonable measure, should have stopped an hour after midnight. The room was private, windowless by design, the air scrubbed and cold in the way of places built for men who could not afford to be found. For a long moment he simply lay there, cataloging the ache in his chest, the raw scrape at the base of his throat where something had cut a path for air, and the strange, lingering taste of iron and something herbal underneath it. Then Taehyun's face swam into focus above him, and the silence broke. "You're awake," Taehyun said, in the flat tone of a man who had spent the night deciding how he would deliver bad news and then been robbed of the chance. "The doctors want to run more scans. I told them to wait until you'd had a minute." "How long was I out?" 9 hours. "You were clinically dying for at least 6 minutes of it, according to the first responders' notes." Taehyun's jaw worked. Tetrodotoxin derivative. Modified. The kind of thing that doesn't have an antidote, because nobody's supposed to survive it long enough to need one. Jun-woo pushed himself upright against the pillows, ignoring the doctor who appeared instantly at his elbow with a hand meant to stop him. He waved the man off. "Then how am I alive, Taehyun?" For an answer, his head of security set a small evidence bag on the rolling table beside the bed. Inside it, catching the fluorescent light at an angle that made it look almost harmless, sat a glass vial no bigger than a lipstick tube, its rim crusted dark with dried blood, his blood, Jun-woo understood, though the tag on the bag said it had been recovered from the alley floor 11 feet from where he'd fallen. "Whoever did this to you wanted you dead in the time it takes to finish a drink," Taehyun said. "Whoever saved you did it with something our own toxicologists have never seen." The lab pulled a partial compound profile off the residue. "It's not synthesized anywhere on our supplier list. Not black market, not pharmaceutical, not military. It's custom. Somebody built this from scratch, in small batches, recently." Jun-woo turned the bag over in his fingers, watching the dried blood catch and release the light. He remembered almost nothing of the alley itself, a woman's voice, low and urgent, telling him to stay still, look at me, and then hands at his throat that did not shake even once. He remembered thinking, with the strange clarity of a mind running out of oxygen, that he did not want those hands to stop. "Find her," he said. "Not the syndicate that tried to have me killed. I already know who benefits from my death, and we will deal with them in time. Find the person who kept me alive long enough to have that conversation with vengeance in the first place. That could take weeks. Whoever made this compound didn't file it with anyone. Then it takes weeks." Jun-woo set the vial down with more care than the object strictly warranted. "Pull every research grant, every university procurement order, every private lab license in Southern California with toxicology or pharmacology capability. Cross-reference against anyone who filed a custom reagent synthesis in the last 18 months. Somewhere in that list is a name, and I want it before the people who tried to kill me realize there's a witness who can say exactly how they did it." Taehyun studied him for a moment longer than was strictly professional, the look of a man recalculating what kind of order he'd just been given. Then he nodded once, and left to make it happen. 12 miles away, in a hospital that smelled of bleach and burnt coffee, Chloe Vance was finishing hour 14 of a shift that had started with a stabbing and was ending, mercifully, with nothing more dramatic than a drunk sophomore who'd mistaken a stop sign for a speed bump. She signed the last chart with a hand that had gone slightly numb around the pen, dropped it in the tray, and did not let herself think about the alley, or the man whose pulse she'd coaxed back from nothing with a compound she was not, strictly speaking, licensed to be carrying outside a controlled lab environment. She had done the math 100 times since. If she'd called it in through channels, filed a report, waited for the ambulance the way any sane person would have, he'd have died in the time it took the paramedics to identify the toxin. Instead, she'd broken 4 separate protocols, used up half a year's careful, quiet stockpile of her own experimental antidote, and walked away without so much as a name. It had felt, in the moment, like the only decent thing to do. It still did. That didn't mean it hadn't been reckless enough to end a career she'd spent a decade building on scholarships and double shifts and a stubborn refusal to owe anyone anything. Her phone buzzed as she pushed through the hospital's side doors into the gray wash of early morning. "Leo. You home yet? Ran out of the good coffee, don't yell at me." She smiled despite herself and called him instead of texting back, because some habits from raising a kid brother mostly alone survived long past the point where he technically needed raising. "I'm not yelling about coffee," she said when he picked up. "I'm saving my yelling for whenever you tell me what time you actually got in last night." "Study group. I have a witness." "Multiple witnesses." "Uh-huh." "You sound tired," Leo said, and something in his voice shifted, older than 20 for a second. "You've been weird since Tuesday." "Weirder than 16-hour shift weird." Chloe looked out at the parking structure, at the ordinary gray light on ordinary cars, and thought about a black SUV idling somewhere in this city with men inside it who might, right now, be looking for the person who'd left a signature vial behind. She thought about how close she'd come to being someone's headline instead of someone's rescuer. "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired. I'll grab coffee on the way home." She did not tell him about the alley. She had built her entire adult life around one governing principle: stay out of rooms where powerful people decide who lives and who doesn't, because those rooms always find a way to make you complicit in something, and she intended to keep it that way, blood-stained vial or not. Whoever the man in the alley had been, he belonged to a world she had spent years making sure never touched her brothers. She did not yet know that 4 floors up in a private lab across the city, a very patient man in a very good suit had already begun tracing the exact chemical fingerprint of her mistake. It took Jun-woo's people 11 days, not weeks, because money moves faster than patience and Jun-woo had never lacked for either. The list narrowed from 400 procurement records to 60, then to 12, then, once his analysts matched a rare stabilizing agent in the antidote residue to a compound that had only ever been ordered by one university lab in the greater Los Angeles area. To a single name typed in clean block letters on an intelligence brief that landed on his desk at 2 in the morning. Chloe Vance. 27, clinical toxicologist, staff physician, Cedar Grove Memorial ER. Adjunct research fellow, USC Department of Pharmacology. No criminal record. No known syndicate affiliations. No family connections of interest, aside from one younger brother, Leo Vance, 20, enrolled at the same university. Financially unremarkable. Student loan debt, modest apartment, no significant assets. Jun-woo read it twice, then a third time, looking for the thing that would explain a woman with nothing to gain choosing to save a stranger's life at 4 in the morning in an alley that reeked of danger from 50 feet away. He found nothing except a research history that suggested she was, by every account that mattered, brilliant. 3 published papers on rapid response antidote synthesis, a fellowship application currently stalled for lack of funding, and a compound formula, buried in a footnote of her most recent paper, that matched the residue signature almost exactly. He set the brief down and looked out at the city, lit up gold and indifferent below his window, and felt something he had not felt in a long time, which was curiosity uncomplicated by suspicion. Pull up everything else, he told Taehyun. I want to know who she is before I meet her. He went to the university himself, against every instinct his security team possessed and every recommendation they made. It was nearly 10 at night when he found her, alone in a third-floor lab that smelled of ethanol and old coffee, hunched over a centrifuge with her hair escaping its knot and her scrubs traded for a faded university sweatshirt 3 sizes too big. She did not hear the door. He watched her for a moment longer than he should have, this woman who'd held his throat open with steady hands and vanished before he could so much as see her face clearly, and understood, with the particular clarity of a man who rarely misjudged people, that whatever he'd expected to find here, it was not this, someone entirely unimpressed with the idea of him, even before she knew who he was. Dr. Vance. She turned fast, one hand already closing around a heavy glass flask like a weapon, and then went very still when she saw him. Recognition moved across her face in stages, confusion, then something colder, more calculating, as she took in the suit, the posture, the 2 men who'd stopped just inside the doorway and stayed there like furniture built to look unthreatening and fail at it. You're the alley, she said, flat, not a question. I'm the alley, he agreed. I wanted to thank you properly. In person. You could have sent a card. I did leave one. He almost smiled at that, at the memory of the trash can she'd apparently dumped it into within the hour, according to the man he'd had watching from a discreet distance. You didn't seem interested in keeping it. I'm not interested in anything you're about to offer me, Chloe said, setting the flask down with more control than the moment probably warranted. I did what any competent physician would do. I don't need money for it, and I definitely don't need whatever protection detail you've got parked outside my building thinking I haven't noticed. You noticed. I notice a lot of things. It's part of the job. She crossed her arms, chin lifted, and there it was again, that total absence of the fear or the greed he'd spent his whole career learning to read and exploit in other people. Look. I'm glad you're alive. I meant that when I said it to you unconscious, and I mean it now. But I'm not part of whatever world tried to kill you, and I have absolutely no interest in becoming part of it. So thank you for the visit. I have 3 more hours of work and a shift in the morning. Jun-woo studied her for a long moment, recalibrating something in himself that had gone untouched for years. Every person who had ever done him a favor had wanted something back, eventually. Loyalty repaid in leverage, kindness repaid in obligation. He had built an empire on the assumption that this was simply how the world worked. And here was a woman standing in a fluorescent-lit lab at 10 at night, refusing an open blank check with the same flat patience she might use to refuse a second cup of bad coffee. My card, he said, setting a plain black rectangle on the corner of her workbench, isn't payment. It's a number that reaches me directly, day or night, if you ever need something no one else can give you. I don't expect you to use it. I'd like you to have it anyway. Chloe looked at the card, then at him, and something in her expression softened by exactly 1 degree before hardening right back into place. I'll walk you out, she said, which was as close to a concession as he suspected she was capable of making. He left without argument. From the hallway, through the lab's narrow window, he watched her pick the card up between 2 fingers, study it for a long moment with an expression he could not quite read, and drop it into the wastebasket beside her desk. He found, walking back to the car, that he was smiling anyway. The break-in happened 4 nights later, while Chloe was on a double shift she hadn't planned for, and she came home at 2 in the morning to a door that didn't need a key anymore because the lock had been drilled clean through. Her building's ancient security camera had, predictably, been offline for a month. She stood frozen in the hallway for a full 10 seconds before some old, cold instinct. The one that had gotten her and Leo through a childhood that taught her early to notice when a room had changed, pushed her forward instead of back. Inside, the apartment had been taken apart with a precision that felt worse than random ransacking. Drawers pulled and left open, but not emptied onto the floor the way a burglar chasing cash would do it. Her laptop was gone. So were 3 notebooks from her desk. The ones with her handwritten formula work, the compound structures she'd never bothered to digitize because paper felt safer than a server somewhere. Whoever had been here had known exactly what they wanted and taken nothing else, which was its own kind of message. The real message was in the bathroom, written across her mirror in something dark and viscous that she made herself identify clinically. A mixture of ash and what her nose told her, sickeningly, was blood, though not enough to indicate a person had been hurt to produce it, were 4 words in careful block letters: "We know what you know." She sat down hard on the edge of her bathtub, hands shaking for the first time since the alley, and made herself breathe the way she'd trained 100 panicking family members to breathe in the ER. Someone had connected her to the alley. Someone who was not, apparently, on the side that wanted its patriarch alive. Her first call was to Leo's dorm, a short, controlled conversation designed to sound like nothing was wrong while she confirmed, with her heart in her throat, that he was safe, asleep, annoyed at being woken up over nothing. Her second call, made with hands that had finally stopped shaking, was to campus security, filing the break-in as a routine burglary because the truth was not something she knew how to say out loud yet. Her third call, made 40 minutes later, standing in her ransacked kitchen with the mirror's message still burning behind her eyes, was to a number she'd committed to memory without quite meaning to, retrieved not from a trash can she'd emptied that same night but from the version of it she'd photographed on her phone before throwing the card away, telling herself at the time that it was only prudent to have a record. He picked up on the second ring, as though he'd been waiting. "Someone broke into my apartment," she said, before he could speak, before she could talk herself out of it. "They took my research. They left a threat. I think it's connected to you, and I think you already know that, or you wouldn't answer a blocked number at 2 in the morning." There was a pause on the line, brief and controlled. "Stay exactly where you are," Jun-woo said. "Don't touch anything else. I'm sending a car. I didn't call for a rescue." "I know," he said, and something in his voice had gone quiet and certain in a way that, despite everything, steadied her more than she wanted it to. "You called because you're smart enough to know when a situation has stopped being something you can handle alone. That's not weakness, Dr. Vance. That's the same instinct that kept me alive in an alley. Trust it a little further tonight." She didn't answer right away. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent to the 4 words drying dark on her bathroom mirror. But she found, standing there with her research gone and her home violated and her carefully guarded independence suddenly looking less like armor and more like a door she'd left open on the wrong side, that she did not hang up the phone. The compound Jun-woo took her to sat above the city like something that had been carved out of the hills rather than built on them, all glass and concrete and a security perimeter that made the drive-up feel less like arriving somewhere and more like being absorbed into it. Chloe sat in the back of the SUV with her one salvaged bag of essentials on her lap, watching the lights of the city fall away below, and told herself this was temporary. A tactical necessity. Not a surrender. Inside, the estate was quieter than she'd expected, fewer armed men, more of the hushed, watchful efficiency of a place that ran on discipline rather than display. Taehyun met them at the door, gave her a look that was assessing rather than hostile, and showed her to a guest wing large enough to make her modest apartment look like a supply closet. "I'm not going to just sit here," she told Jun-woo, the first thing she said once the door closed and it was only the two of them and a silence that felt, for the first time, less adversarial than exhausted. "I have research. I have work. If I'm stuck here, I need a lab. Even a bad one. Especially now, whoever did this has my formulas, which means they can either replicate what saved your life or they can weaponize the parts of it that would kill someone twice as fast." Jun-woo looked at her for a long moment, and something crossed his face that she would later understand was the exact instant his opinion of her shifted from obligation to ally. "Taehyun will have equipment brought in by morning. Whatever you need. Just tell him. I need my own supply chain. I don't trust anything routed through your people until I know it hasn't been tampered with." "Fair," he said, and did not argue, which surprised her more than anything else that terrible night had. By the third night, the makeshift lab in the estate's east wing had become something closer to a real one, and Chloe found herself, at nearly 1 in the morning, hunched over a borrowed spectrometer with a mug of tea going cold at her elbow, when Jun-woo appeared in the doorway with a second mug and the particular stillness of a man who'd learned, recently, to knock before entering rooms that weren't his to walk into uninvited. "You don't sleep," she said, without looking up. "Neither do you." He set the tea down beside her cold one and didn't leave, and for once she didn't ask him to. They talked, in the loose, unguarded way people talk in the hours when the rest of the world is asleep and pretense starts to feel like too much effort. He told her, in pieces, about a father who'd built an empire on loyalty and then broken every rule of it the day he sold out his own son to save himself, and how Jun-woo had spent 15 years since making sure no one would ever again mistake him for someone who could be discarded. She told him, in pieces of her own, about raising Leo alone from the time she was 20 and he was 13, about scholarships stitched together out of stubbornness, about a version of safety she'd built for the two of them entirely out of never needing anyone. "You could have let me die in that alley," Jun-woo said at one point, quiet, watching her work rather than watching her face. "It would have solved a great many of your problems." "I don't get to choose who deserves to live," Chloe said, and meant it the way she'd meant it every time she'd said it before, to men and women and children who'd made worse choices than existing near danger. "I only get to choose whether I try." He didn't answer that. But he stayed until the spectrometer finished its run, and when he finally left her to sleep, he took the empty mugs with him without being asked, and Chloe found herself watching the door long after it closed, aware of a shift in the ground beneath her that she was nowhere near ready to name. The blood panel results came back on a Tuesday, and Chloe read them 3 times before she trusted herself to speak. She'd been running residual samples from Jun-woo's original blood work for a week, chasing the same synthetic signature that had led his people to her door, except she wasn't hunting for herself this time. She was hunting for whoever had built the poison in the first place. "It's not standard black market," she said, when Jun-woo found her still at the bench past midnight, the estate quiet around them except for the low hum of equipment. "The base compound's clean, almost pharmaceutical grade, but there's a stabilizer signature I've only seen cited once, in a supply seizure report from 3 years ago. It traces back to a lab the DEA flagged and never managed to shut down. Cartel-owned. Boss choice people." Jun-woo went very still in the way she'd learned meant he was recalculating something dangerous. Choice supplies half the syndicates on the West Coast. If he sold this to whoever tried to kill me, it wasn't a rogue transaction. Someone inside my organization authorized the purchase. "Someone with access to your inner circle," Chloe said. "Someone who knew exactly what would kill you and exactly how much time they'd have before anyone noticed." They sat with that for a long moment, the weight of it settling over the lab like something with mass. Jun-woo had a name already forming behind his eyes, she could see it in the tightness at his jaw, but he didn't say it yet, not until he had proof solid enough to survive being wrong. "I have a contact," he said finally. "Someone inside Choi's distribution network who might confirm the buyer. It has to be in person. He won't talk over any line I can't personally vouch for." "Then I'm coming." "Chloe. You need someone who can read a chain of custody chemical report and know if he's lying about the batch numbers. That's not a job for your security team." She met his eyes, steady the way she'd been steady over his failing pulse in an alley months ago. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you what I bring to the table." He didn't argue further. 2 nights later they drove out toward the industrial edge of the city in an unmarked car, Taehyun trailing a discreet quarter-mile back, and it was in the gap between one streetlight and the next that the first shot came through the rear windshield in a spray of safety glass. Everything after that happened too fast for thought and too slow for mercy. The car swerved, tires screaming, a second round punching through the door panel inches from where Chloe had been sitting a half-second before Jun-woo's arm hooked around her and hauled her down across the seat, his body over hers, absorbing the angle the next shot would have taken. She felt the car shudder as the driver returned fire, felt Jun-woo's heartbeat hammering against her back through his suit jacket, steady even now, even here, like a man who'd decided a long time ago that fear was simply another variable to be managed. The attackers peeled off after less than a minute, a warning, not a real attempt, she'd understand later, meant to prove her phone line had been compromised and that whoever was hunting them knew their movements before they made them. But in the ringing silence after, pulled upright and breathing hard against the ruined seat, Chloe found herself gripping the front of Jun-woo's jacket with both hands, checking him for wounds with the clinical urgency of someone who'd almost lost a patient, except this time it wasn't clinical at all. "You're not hurt," she said, more statement than question, needing to hear herself confirm it. "No." His hand came up to cover hers where it still pressed flat against his chest, and for once neither of them moved to pull away. "Neither are you. That's the part one care about." Something in her chest, guarded for years against exactly this kind of admission, cracked quietly open. The call came 3 days later while Jun-woo was 200 miles north, locked in a room with 4 syndicate bosses who did not trust each other and trusted him even less since word had spread that someone had tried to kill him twice. Chloe was at the university lab, coaching Leo through a titration he was overcomplicating, when the building's fire alarm cut through the fluorescent hum, except it wasn't a fire alarm, not really, not the way the side door buckled inward a heartbeat later under something heavier than a shoulder. "Leo, the supply closet, now," she said, already moving, already reaching for the reinforced cabinet where her more volatile compounds lived behind a lock most people mistook for excessive caution. 4 men in dark tactical gear fanned into the lab, and she had perhaps 8 seconds before they cleared the first row of benches. She used every one of them. A shattered flask of concentrated ammonia solution thrown low created a chemical cloud thick enough to choke and blind the lead attacker. A second, more careful throw of a reactive compound she'd built for exactly this kind of contingency sent the next man staggering back with his eyes streaming, weapon forgotten. She wasn't fighting fair. She'd never intended to. She'd spent a career learning exactly how much of the human body a given compound could disable without killing, and tonight that knowledge bought her and her brother 4 full minutes crouched behind a steel supply cabinet while men swore and stumbled in a fog of her own making. Jun-woo's people came through the same broken door at the 4-minute mark, Taehyun at the front of a wave of men who moved with the particular ruthless efficiency of soldiers who'd been told exactly what, and who, they were protecting. The fight that followed was short and one-sided. Whoever had sent this crew hadn't expected serious resistance from a lab technician and a wounded syndicate's scattered forces. By the time Jun-woo himself arrived, breathless from a flight cut short mid-summit, the last of the intruders was zip-tied against an overturned lab bench, and Chloe was on her knees beside her brother checking his pulse with hands that had finally started to shake. "He's fine," she said, before Jun-woo could ask, before he'd even fully crossed the room. "He's fine. I'm fine." Jun-woo pulled her up into his arms anyway, one hand cradling the back of her head the way she remembered cradling his in an alley that felt like a lifetime ago, and held on longer than either of them would have permitted themselves a week earlier. It was Taehyun, going through the restrained mercenary's phone, who found the message thread that ended the last of the ambiguity. Orders routed through an encrypted relay, traced back through 3 false accounts to a device that pinged, at the exact moment of the attack, from a conference room 200 miles north, the same room Jun-woo had just left. Vice Chairman Park's private line. "He was in the room with me," Jun-woo said, staring at the screen, voice gone quiet and cold in a way Chloe hadn't heard from him before. "He ordered this while sitting 8 feet away from me." "Now you can prove it," Chloe said. "Properly. In front of everyone who matters." The harbor estate sat at the end of a private causeway, all glass and cold stone and a view of black water that seemed, that night, less like scenery and more like a held breath. Jun-woo had called it a routine gathering, territorial disputes, quarterly accounting, the kind of syndicate business that bored everyone into compliance. Chloe arrived at his side in a dark, tailored coat that did nothing to disguise the leather case in her hand, and every boss in that room clocked the significance of a stranger being permitted through security with something they weren't allowed to inspect. Park sat near the head of the long table, composed, unbothered, the picture of a loyal vice chairman who'd weathered 2 attempts on his boss's life with appropriate concern. Chloe watched him from across the room and thought, not for the first time, about how easily charm could be mistaken for innocence by people who'd never had to run a differential diagnosis on a liar. Jun-woo let the routine business run its course first, territorial lines redrawn, tribute schedules confirmed, patient in a way that made the coming reversal more devastating for its restraint. Then, with the meeting nearly closed, he set a single folder on the table and slid it toward the center. "Before we adjourn," he said, "I want to address the 2 attempts made on my life this year. Both of you know about the alley. Fewer of you know about the drive-by, or the raid on a private research facility 3 nights ago. I'd like to resolve, tonight, who's responsible." Chloe opened the leather case and produced the mass spectrometry reports she'd spent 2 sleepless nights preparing. Chain of custody documented at every step, the synthetic signature matched precisely against Boss Choi's flagged lab output, procurement records cross-referenced against an encrypted purchase order traced to a shell account that led, after 4 layers of misdirection, to a device registered under a name every person at that table recognized. "The poison used in the initial attack," she said, her voice even, clinical, the voice she used to deliver terminal diagnoses to families who needed facts more than comfort, was purchased 11 weeks before the wedding, before the alley incident, from a lab owned by Boss Choi. The purchase order was authorized using credentials belonging to Vice Chairman Park. The same account authorized payment for the mercenary team that attacked my research lab 3 nights ago, at a time when Mr. Kang can confirm Vice Chairman Park was sitting in a conference room 200 miles away, believing himself far from the scene. Silence dropped over the table like a blade. Park's composure held for exactly 3 seconds before it didn't, his eyes flicking toward the exits, toward men who were no longer looking at him with anything like loyalty. "This is fabrication," he said, "too fast, too high. Constructed evidence, planted by a licensed toxicologist with a documented chain of custody and no financial stake in your downfall," Jun-woo said, quiet and final. "You nearly killed me twice, Park. You endangered a woman who owed this family nothing and a boy who's never touched syndicate business in his life. Tonight, in front of everyone who matters, you answer for that." Park's hand moved toward his jacket a half-second before the room erupted. The firefight that followed lasted less than 4 minutes and felt, to Chloe, like several lifetimes. Park's loyalists, 3 men seated among the Harbor Estate's rotating security detail, opened fire from the room's flanking doors in a coordinated attempt that made clear this had always been a contingency, a hostile takeover dressed up as a summit. Glass shattered. The long table splintered under gunfire. Jun-woo pulled her down behind an overturned chair with the same unthinking speed he'd used in the car, and this time she didn't waste breath telling him not to. She worked instead. A syndicate lieutenant went down 6 feet away, blood spreading fast from a wound in his thigh, and Chloe was moving before she'd consciously decided to, tearing fabric into a pressure bandage, shouting instructions over the gunfire in the same voice she used in a trauma bay. Someone. One of Park's men, in the chaos, kicked over a canister near the room's ventilation intake, and the acrid chemical stink that followed hit her nose a half-second before it hit her instincts. "Gas trap," she shouted. "Get everyone toward the east doors, now, it's heavier than air, low to the ground." Jun-woo relayed the order without question, and the room's remaining loyal security shifted formation on her word alone, herding the wounded and the merely terrified toward clean air while Taehyun's team closed the distance on Park's shrinking pocket of resistance. Chloe kept working through it, kept her hands steady on wounds that weren't hers while the world exploded in fragments around her, because it was the only thing she knew how to do that made any of this survivable. She looked up once, in the last minute of it, to see Jun-woo cross the ruined room toward Park with the flat, terrible calm of a man who had stopped calculating outcomes and started simply finishing what needed finishing. She didn't watch what happened next. She kept her hands on a stranger's wound and let the sound of it end behind her, and when Jun-woo returned to her side minutes later, blood on his knuckles that wasn't his own, she reached up and pulled him down to check him for injuries anyway, because some habits were now simply who she was. "It's over," he said, quiet, certain, the words meant for both of them. "He's finished. All of it is." 6 months brought more change than Chloe had expected, most of it quiet in the way real change usually is. The syndicate restructured itself under Jun-woo's steady, patient hand, its ties to Choi's cartel severed publicly and permanently, its remaining loyalists sorted between those who'd stand behind a leader who valued something beyond profit and those who found other, smaller organizations to serve. Jun-woo kept his promise to leave her out of that world's daily machinery, and she kept hers to never again pretend she could stand entirely outside it. The grant arrived on an ordinary Thursday, a letter from a foundation she'd never directly petitioned, offering full independent funding for a toxicology research lab built entirely to her own specifications. No institutional red tape, no committee second-guessing her methods, just the work she'd wanted since she was 22 years old and furious at how many patients died waiting for antidotes that took bureaucracies years to approve. She read the letter twice before she let herself cry, and it was 3 weeks before she learned, from an offhand comment by the foundation's director, that the endowment had come from an anonymous benefactor who'd insisted on one condition, that Dr. Vance never be told his name unless she asked. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. The lab opened in early spring, glass-walled and sunlit in a way her old cramped university space had never been, her name on the door in simple block letters that felt, still, faintly unbelievable. She was calibrating a new spectrometer on the evening of her first week when she heard the door chime, and turned to find Jun-woo standing in the doorway in the same unhurried, watchful stillness she'd first seen across a lab bench nearly a year before. "You said you'd come by," she said, setting down her tools. "I did." He crossed the room slowly, taking in the space with an expression she'd learned to read as quiet pride on her behalf. Then he reached into his coat and set something small on her workbench, not a blank check this time, not a card meant to buy gratitude, but a single brass key, worn smooth from years of use. "What's this?" "The estate," he said. "I'm not asking you to move in. I'm not asking you to give up this place, or your work, or the life you built without me. I'm giving you a key because I want you to have a door that's always open to you, on whatever terms you choose to walk through it. Not a cage, Chloe. Not an obligation. Just a place that's yours, if you ever want it to be." She turned the key over in her fingers, feeling the weight of everything it wasn't demanding of her, and thought of an Ellie a lifetime ago, of a stranger's failing pulse under her hands and a quiet, stubborn certainty that had carried her through everything since. "I'll want it," she said. "Just not tonight. Tonight I have a titration running." Jun-woo laughed, an easy, unguarded sound she'd learned, slowly, was rarer and more precious than anything his empire could buy. And pulled a second stool up beside her bench without being asked, settling in to wait out the work the way he always had, patient and unhurried and entirely, finally, hers.